I don't think there's anyone here whose wedding I've ever officiated at. So I'll tell you now that every single time I do a wedding, I begin with the same exact lines, and it goes like this. Joe and Schmo, you are standing here today to enter into the covenant of marriage. Now, I will tell you, a covenant is more than a promise. It is a commitment that says that the two of you are going forward together into the future, even though you don't know what the future is going to hold. Whatever it will hold, you will face it together. It's good, yeah?
So lovely.
Oh, nice, yeah, okay. And so if you think of a wedding, right, you think of like flowers and joy, and covenant is a good thing. If you think of a covenant, you don't think of a guy with a spear impaling two people who are fornicating in the middle of the synagogue.
Fornicating, what a great word.
Thank you, Elise. But that's what happens in this week's Torah portion.
Are you recording?
But before I talk about that kind of covenant, I actually want to talk about all the covenants that we get to experience in our Torah. Because actually there are a lot of them. And most of them are actually quite beautiful. We begin all the way back with the story of Noah and the ark and the rainbow. And after the rainbow, there is a covenant that God makes with Noah, never to have another flood. And that is one kind of covenant, which is between God and all of humanity. And very quickly after that, we have a second covenant between God and Abraham. And that is a covenant between God and one specific people. And right after that, we have a covenant between God and the people Israel at Sinai. And for the first time there, we have the kind of covenant that is mutual, right? In which God promises something to the people, and then the people promise something right back to God. Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will understand. And what happens right after that? The people break the covenant, right? The golden calf, Moses comes down the mountain and he breaks the tablets, and you think it's all over, but it's not. Because the covenant is repaired. We learn right then and there that covenant broken can survive, because it can be repaired with the second set of tablets. But we also learn that the first set of tablets will forever travel with the second set of tablets, because covenant survives when we remember the rupture, not when we pretend that the rupture never happened. Then there is the fourth covenant, which I mentioned earlier, and I'll come back to in a second. And then there's the fifth covenant in the book of Deuteronomy, quite lovely, which is the covenant between God and all the people who haven't even yet been born. Those are just a few of the covenants that we have in our holy Torah, in our most holy book of teachings. And for the covenant of the spearing that happens in this week's Torah portion, I'm only going to talk about it for a second, because as you can imagine, it's really not one of my favorites. Right, there is a plague going on among the Israelites, and there are these two people who really do come into the Mishkan, into the middle of the tabernacle, in front of all of the Israelites, and they do start to have sex, and the Israelites are frozen. Everyone is watching them until this one man named Pinchas decides that the right thing to do is to run up to them and to impale them, murdering them. And that's where last week's Torah portion ends. And this week's Torah portion begins with God responding to what has just happened with a covenant of peace, a brit shalom. So here's the thing about the Hebrew word shalom, which many of us know means peace. It actually, the root of it is the Hebrew word shalem, which means wholeness. So this covenant that God gives to Pinchas after this really violent act is more like, Pinchas, in response to what you just did, I am going to give you something different. I am going to give you peace, and I am going to give you wholeness. And in fact, the next time that we see Pinchas in our Bible, he's actually a diplomat. We have some diplomats here this evening. He actually is a diplomat making peace between two warring peoples, a different type of covenant entirely. So here's the different kinds of covenants we have. We have the one with no strings. We have the one between God and one human being. We have the one between God and a whole people. We have the one of peace, and we have the one between all those not yet born. And what we learn about covenant, in the Jewish tradition at least, is that a covenant is an evolving agreement. A covenant is not static. It is something that changes, which of course brings me back to any two people who have stood at the chuppah. And that great line by the therapist Esther Perel, which I'm sure some of you have heard, which is that we would hope that anyone would have 2 or 3 marriages over the course of their lifetime, but what you really want is for all of them to be to the same person. What happens over the course of a marriage is, of course, not the absence of change. In the covenant of marriage is what you want is that two people continue to keep on re-choosing each other over and over and over as the terms of the marriage continue to change. I think of it as my husband just moved to Aspen this week after 16 years. I know, it's been long enough. After finishing 16 years of his job in DC, and the terms of our marriage are about to change as well. It's now time for you to think about who's making dinner every single night of the week, sweetheart. Things change over the course of a lifetime. But the healthy evolution of a covenant, of course, cannot happen in a vacuum. For it to grow, we have to always continue to learn from our mistakes and always do better. And what's interesting about the story of Pinchas and the spearing is that for the last 2,500 years, since the story was written down in the Torah, we have rabbi after rabbi after rabbi telling the story over and over again and trying to learn from it. Why did the story happen? How could it have been done differently? How can we learn from it and do our leadership differently in the current moment, whatever the moment was for that specific rabbi? We understand that we can't move forward if we do not understand honestly and transparently where we come from. Which brings us to today. So the question is, what do we know of this American covenant that we are being handed this year, Erev 250 years of America? Certainly it has evolved from the one that we were given in 1776. The first version of our covenant was radical in its time, but it was incomplete. It was written for all men, and it certainly did not include a lot of the people in this very space this evening, and millions more. And that covenant too broke badly, less than 100 years after it was created. And what came after was not a restoration, it was a new set of tablets carved out of our Civil War and carried alongside the memory of the first set of tablets. And our American covenant has continued to evolve and to grow and to break in small ways and to be renegotiated over and over again, often by the people that the first covenant never intended to include in the first place. And that's the fact that gives me some solace as I stand here today with all of you and with this iteration of the covenant in a little bit of peril. Not because I know what the new terms of this covenant are going to be. I don't. And the truth is, I don't know what the covenant is going to be every single time I stand under the chuppah with a couple, because they're entering into something that I don't yet understand the shape of. But if many thousand years of Jewish history teaches us anything, it is that covenant was never supposed to run on certainty. It runs on our willingness to show up and do the work of building and repair week after week, generation after generation, even after, especially after it breaks. We are not the first ones to be handed a broken covenant. But b'chol dor vador, in every single generation, we are the ones who get to decide whether the covenant is worth maintaining. And I believe it is. And I hope you do as well. So when I say Shabbat Shalom to you tonight, I say it in the fuller sense, not just in the sense of peace, but in the sense of wholeness, including every single person who resides in our beautiful country. May we have the courage to say aloud what is broken, the strength to build together whatever comes next, and the honor to uphold the covenant of this country that we are privileged to call home. Happy Independence Day, everybody.